The problem the problem with thinking everybody around you is really stupid is most of the time it just kind of says a lot about the person who thinks that. But this isn't always the case, because obviously there's some distinction there's some distinction between the person observing and the observation, and the credibility of the person obviously can differ between different people. So some people obviously have clearer lenses than others, and that's just a fact. And the people who don't have as clear of a lens, they don't see reality for what it is, or you'll never see it for 100% what it is. You're always going to have your tinted lens to some degree. But the people who don't see it for what it is, or they don't even want to measure it in any way, they don't think that you can look out with a clear lens and identify objects and concepts, are the people who have the foggiest lenses, or they would be identified as the worst things, right? I mean, how do I put it into like a real world example? I mean, I look around and I see like super predators everywhere, right? Everyone knows, and here's the thing, I just heard this in a recent video, and it's true. In a lot of ways, it's very true. That there's action and then there's lack of action, and they're basically the same exact thing, right? I mean, in previous videos I've talked about there's the thing and then there's negative space, right? And sometimes understanding the thing, you can get a picture of the thing by simply getting, the shadow or the negative space of the thing. And I'm not talking necessarily about a physical object, but if you're like learning how to do something and you learn all the ways, not to do something, like you keep messing up again and again and again, you're going to keep refining the process of doing that thing over the course of time. And in a lot of ways, you're obligated to be better at the thing because your picture of the thing gets clearer and clearer. Now, your picture of the thing becomes clearer and clearer from, your angle, from your perspective, right? But I mean, that's where the whole like my truth, your truth thing comes in. And if your truth is absolutely clear, then you will, given enough time, given, theoretic infinite amount of time, see very, very, almost 100% clarity. I don't think 100% clarity is possible, but you'll see like, 98% clarity from your angle that you're viewing the object or the concept or doing the thing or whatever. And that's why, that's why games kind of become more boring, and that's why getting older, you just tend to sort of lose yourself, because you lose yourself when you're playing these games, whether it's getting a job, the economy, socializing, etc. Throughout time, you're just naturally going to keep refining yourself and evolving or whatever more and more to, hopefully, and I think it's in our nature to try to refine ourselves in situations to be more efficient as opposed to less efficient. So by the nature of that concept of becoming more efficient throughout time, it's kind of like you're constantly hammering the thing, and you're hammering out the kinks, and a kink in something might be your self-expression that you will eventually have to lose to gain a level of efficiency in the thing. So, not everybody can relate to it, but like a card game, for example, like Magic the Gathering is like a card game. When you first start playing that game, It's really, really fun, and it's still really fun. You know, you can keep playing it. It's really fun, but you know, eventually people will declare their deck as like, and it's one of the few games that it makes it all so obvious to me, and you can relate it to other things. But people will declare their Magic deck as like, this is like top 10 like meta like competitive modern deck, or they'll be like, this is just like a kitchen table like casual popper deck or whatever, and there's all these different like modes of playing. And not only do people announce the mode they're playing, but they kind of announce the level of competitiveness that their deck is built. And part of it is like an ego thing, right? It's like you want to just make kind of like a fun, like I made a raccoon deck, right? And you want to like announce that like this isn't a serious deck, guys, so if you win, like know that I wasn't like 100% trying, right? But that's the thing when you're building a car. Let's move it to cars, right? Like, you know, talk about card games, move it to cars. You can't have a big, you know, whatever, big box, a big rectangle, a non-aerodynamic box on the top of your car, a big watchtower, you know, what are those things called, like turrets or whatever, like on the sides of castles. You can't have one of those big things on your car without making the car more inefficient. And that's the same thing with like running. Running's a good example, and running is an example that someone else on YouTube has brought up, who I refer to a lot. But you can't dance and run efficiently. And some people would like to argue that you can, but dancing while you're running is naturally going to make you run slower. And that's the same thing when you're building like a deck. So you take kind of a lot of the magic out of it as you move forward in time, becoming a more refined, efficient person. And you know, this was something that on almost like a basic logic level when I was younger, that I thought, you know, like I thought like adults knew what they were doing, right? And it's kind of a hypocritical thing to say, because one part of me does think everyone knows exactly what they're doing, but another part of me, when I grew up and I realized like, well, I'm technically an adult now, and I don't know. There's a lot of things that I'd have to like envision myself in a scenario and just be like, would I be able to handle this scenario very efficiently? I mean, it depends. Like, would I be able to talk my bullshit efficiently while having a beer at a party and a cigarette? Like, sure, I could probably do that. But when it comes to like saving somebody who fell off of a boat, like, you know, I don't know if I'm the one to turn to. But when I was a kid, I would just, I respected my elders and shit. And yeah, I basically just thought people kind of like knew what they were talking about. I took it at face value, and it's kind of like, it's the case, but it's not the case, because it's almost like a lot of people have this chosen, like they choose to deny really seeing themselves. And I feel like that's where I differ from a lot of people. And I guess this video is just a fucking conceited video about how awesome I am. But when I look around, I see people all making intentional decisions, or lack of action, or action, you know, it's all the same. But at the same time, people need to kind of deny themselves, you know, looking in the mirror to an extent. I was recently playing video games with someone I knew, and basically it's just funny because it's actually a thing. Sorry if you're watching it, but like, I mean, here's the truth. Pretty much everyone has discussed like not liking playing this game with this particular person because they act really arrogant. Like they're kind of a know-it-all, and they're like conceited about like playing the game correctly, when they're pretty much the worst person at the game. Like they'll like run in and die. Like they'll be the 12 of the deaths, and everyone else will have like 2 deaths on the mission, right? And they'll have 12 deaths. But then they'll talk to you like, you did something wrong when all you had to do is like move a little bit slower and be more careful to get through it, and spend the extra 5 minutes like clearing out the enemies like behind cover as opposed to running into a room and dying. But these people, to like protect their own egos, are going to be like, well, you did something wrong. You didn't like move with me into the room like a fucking like a hammer, like a Thor hammer moving into the next room. You didn't read my mind that I wanted you to move this very second. And yeah, it's just the same thing with a lot of stuff. You know. Somebody in the lobby, well, this is GTA, right? Somebody in the lobby was like killing other players, which is like, it's kind of like the game, right? And they're like, quote, like, yeah, I grew up in like the golden age of trolling. Like, I'm really laying into this guy, and not quote, this isn't the quote, this is the gist. But I'm really laying into this kid in chat. I think I really hurt his feelings or whatever. And it's like, yeah, I don't know. I really ruined his day. It's just like, dude, you don't know that. Like, who cares? Like, what are you talking about? The golden age of it's so cringy. Like, oh, the golden age of trolling, dude. Oh, it was so much different back in the day. I mean, I feel like if anything, back in the day, it was more personable between people. I mean, back in the day, was like I remember, and this obviously somebody in the 80s or like who was actually a teenager in the early 90s, because I was like, I was born in 91. But I remember like riding my bike to a friend's house. Like that was still sort of like a thing when I was growing up. And it still probably is depending on where you live. But there wasn't so much of the internet and communicating through computers and stuff. So I mean, usually if you wanted to say something to somebody, you would say it in real life. So if anything, I mean, the impersonal like trolling or whatever back in the day probably wasn't actually as rampant as it is now. So I don't know, maybe not, but yeah, I just feel like people totally lose themselves as they get older, basically. And I mean, I could think of a lot of examples with people I know. And there's people who are still like pretty good people, but I think everybody kind of just becomes more egocentric because they become more refined in their world, and by the time you're whatever in your like upper 20s, you kind of think like what you're doing because you haven't like starved to death in a gutter at this point. And you haven't starved to death in a gutter at this point. So people think they know what they're doing. There's a weird bug on the ceiling. And it's not always the case, really. I mean, I think on micro level, I think everyone like knows what they're doing 100% of the time. But on like a macro level, I think a lot of people don't really know what they're doing. And I'll admit, on like a macro level, depending on what the goal is, there's a lot of things where I don't really know what I'm doing at all. And I'm the type of person, I'll just be like, I don't know, I'm not 100% sure. I say that a lot. Like, I'm like 98% sure, like, right? Like, then that confidence people sometimes display, that confidence will fool me. And it not so much anymore, but it still does. Like, I went to the grocery store, and younger girl, probably could have been a mistake, right? But like, it's like just the arrogance, like the sheer like egocentrism of people sometimes is so fucking annoying. Because it was like 11:01 or whatever, and I gave her like 12, and then like I'm handing her the money. She like has the money in her hand. I'm not gonna assume she's gonna give me a penny, right? And I didn't have a penny. And she's like, oh yeah, you don't have to worry about the penny or whatever. I'm like, oh, that's cool. Like I was expecting her just to give me $1 back. And she doesn't, and then like she just so confidently, because I said something, then I'm like, oh, you didn't give me my change or whatever. She's like, oh no, you gave me 11 or whatever. That's what it was. I was like, okay, I didn't think so. Like, all right. I mean, like you just said it so fucking confidently though. Like you know what you're talking about. Like not even think. Like I hate when people. That pisses me off. That's one of my biggest pet peeves in life. I have a few, right? I have a lot of pet peeves. I'm a temperamental person. I get pretty angry, right? But one of my biggest pet peeves is when people correct you when they don't know what they're talking about, and they don't even they don't even have the humanity to like question what they did. Like if you're questioning it, it's like it just shows like the lack of fucking respect to like another person. Basically, if somebody's like, "Huh, are you like you sure about that?" Like I think any reasonable person would actually re-look at what they did for like a few seconds and be like, okay, somebody's like questioning what I did. Like, is that wrong? But no, just the sheer ignorance, right? So I walk out and I was looking at the receipt and I'm like, no, I was right. I like definitely gave her 12, and then she gave me like $0 back. So I walk in and I'm like, no, yep. I'm like, you definitely didn't give me my change. Like, see on the receipt, like, I did give you 12, and it was like 11.01 or whatever. So she's like, well, how much do I owe you? I'm like, 99 cents. Like technically you owe me 99 cents, right? But it's like, I mean, she was going to be cool about the penny before. Of course, she doesn't hand me a fucking dollar back though, right? She gives me the 99 cents. She gives me the 99 cents, right? But she was going to be cool about the penny before. I mean, maybe she's just too stupid. I don't know. See, that's like, maybe, I want to say that's a lot of people, but who knows? Who knows? I just feel like, you know how the world would be a better place if somebody, first of all, don't be confident if you don't know, if you don't absolutely know. And there's a lot of things that are really hard to know. So just don't be an egocentric idiot about things and just confidently say shit like you just absolutely know. Because like it is like the most idiotic looking thing when you say something of the utmost confidence, like unwavering, fucking unwavering resolution when someone talks about something like full confidence, 100% certainty, and then they're just proven like wrong as fuck like a second later, and it's just like, I don't know. It's not like I've never been wrong after I've been confident. Like there's definitely times where like, I mean, I can even think of something recent where I said something and it's like, I was literally looking at information that was incorrect though. When I said something, I'm like, oh yeah, like it's like 6 days away or whatever. And I like saw like an article on Google or whatever. And then like the person's like, oh, it's like 7 days. I'm like, okay, well this article came out 3 hours ago and said something 6 days. Maybe I didn't read the whole fucking thing, like whatever. But yeah, I don't know. But it's a problem. I don't know what this subject's about, the whole thing. It's just the efficiency moving forward. People getting lost in themselves. People see themselves in everything, right? I mean, the expression, everywhere we look, we see ourselves, and that's true in a lot of ways. You'll never truly see someone else, right? You'll never truly be in their perspective. But I think some people do it better than others. I'd like to think I do it better than other people. And that's right, that's a conceited thing, right? And yeah, as I move forward and become an adult, I think that I'm good at like the things that I take pride in and I put stock in as being important. And unfortunately it's not getting like a 9 to 5. That's the thing. I never really put too much importance on that. And yeah, when I'm dying in a ditch, whatever, in 10 years, I'm in an alleyway or in some kind of homeless shelter, maybe I'll look back and be like, well, that was more important than I thought. I don't think I'll ever be one of these people that, I know I'll never be a person who wants to have a kid. I know that for a fact. That's a whole video of, in my opinion, why people shouldn't have kids. Because it's kind of like a lack of hobbies. Like you don't have enough it's almost like, it's just weird because if you think life isn't worth living, this is the real conundrum with having kids. If you think life isn't worth living without a kid, and it's mostly a status quo thing, right? Like your late 20s, early 30s, like, oh, everyone I know is like having kids, especially with women. No offense, not to be like sexist with the video, but I mean, women definitely get that feeling more than men, especially because they're, the clock's ticking or whatever, on the basket of eggs or whatever. But it's a status quo thing, and plus it's just kind of a lack of hobbies. It's a lack of like, self-realization. It's a lack of actually becoming a full-fledged human being. In my opinion, a lot of people don't actually become human beings. You'd be one of the lucky few if you can call yourself a human being by the end of this life journey, in my opinion. And I mean, just look at the numbers. Smarter people have less kids, I mean, there's like, no offense, but it's like, you know, like the teen mom type and stuff. It's just like, these people have like no hobbies. They have no sense of themselves, and they think that like having a kid's gonna like give them something to live for or like whatever. But it's like, if you feel like you need a kid, like what if you are potentially damning your kid to basically a torturous existence because not everyone can have kids. So if you can have a kid and you feel like you need to have the kid to give your life meaning or to give your life substance, you are trading in the potential happiness of this uncreated life that doesn't want anything at all. It doesn't need to be created. Like the unborn kid, no, it's nowhere. It's nowhere. It's nowhere in the universe. It's not in the ether. It's not in the next, it's not in the next reality. It's not in the alternate reality over just waiting for you to bore it or whatever, spawn it out of your fucking cockroach hole. And once you do, it's kind of potentially trading their happiness in for your own happiness or your own satisfaction, which is pretty much the ultimate, most selfish thing you can do. That's why I hate hearing that it's like a selfish thing not to have kids. There's nothing selfish about not having a kid. It is the opposite, and that's the propaganda people will preach, especially after they have kids. There's no way that people can just like, their ego can't take it. They would become shattered if they realized the real philosophic implication of having a kid and it being one of the most selfish things you can do. And it's cool. I mean, if you're, and this gets in, it's in dangerous territory, right? It gets into dangerous territory to say like, I think it'd be semi-acceptable if you can take responsibility if that kid comes out totally wrong. It has, no arms or legs. It's, mentally, incompetent. I don't know a nice word to say. Like let's say its IQ is extremely low. It can't do many things. It has no limbs. It's physically deformed. It has all kinds of problems, right? Unless you can pay for that kid's entire life. I mean, let's say it's a total failure, right? You have a kid with somebody. The kid you had is an absolute, like, even saying it's a failure is, it's like sacrilegious, right, for a lot of people. But let's just say it's completely incapable of living like what society claims is a successful life of working for whatever, like 60 fucking years and retiring when they're 70 and old and their back hurts and they can barely move, and then they can enjoy their retirement and they die, and that's a perfect life, right? And then hopefully they have a really quick and sudden high intensity heart attack in their sleep and they barely notice it. But even that's kind of like, I don't know, did they not notice it? Were you around? Were you watching them have the like massive heart attack in their sleep? They died peacefully. They were dreaming about bunny rabbits, and then they're just like, and then they died, and now they're an angel in heaven, right? Is that the point of having a kid, is to put people in heaven? What if they don't go to heaven, right? You're potentially damning your kid to hell. I mean, just based on the nature of the universe, how everything is cause and effect, how everything is deterministic. It does have, in a lot of ways, a set path. As soon as you have a kid, that kid will interact with its environment in a certain way. The environment will change it, and it will move forward in its life in a very deterministic pinball machine type of way, with really no like, I don't even know how to explain it. Like the type of autonomy somebody would have on like a metaphysical level. I don't even really know how to explain it. It has autonomy in the sense of like, oh, hey, do I go to my fridge and do I get a Mountain Dew or do I get a water? And then I think in my head like, well, I'm a healthier person. I'll get a water. I don't really need all that sugar. And like, it's like a choice, I guess, right? I mean, that's like free will. It's sort of a choice, but then I just make the choice based on my preferences, right? Which I don't choose. So I mean, the kid is going to literally go, I mean, as soon as it's born, it's basically going to go to heaven or hell. So you're potentially throwing your kid into hell, you know what I mean? Even if it's, let's say 90% of people go to heaven. I mean, I don't believe in any of this shit, but let's say 90% of people go to heaven and 10% of people go to hell. I mean, there's a 10% chance you're flipping the coin, or you're rolling the dice for your kid to potentially go to hell. For your, because you think it will momentarily, this very finite, this very, very small amount of time to make your time more bearable. And it's not like it puts you in heaven having a kid. I mean, in my opinion, it's like the whole angel losing its wings thing. I mean, as soon as people have a kid, that's like an angel losing its wings, you know, the parent, in my opinion. So, I mean, it's actually pretty much the ultimate sin you can commit, and it's also the most selfish act you can pretty much commit in life. I mean, but there's a lot of selfish things people do, you know? I mean, there's a lot of selfish things people do, and that's the same thing with, I mean, I got a comment the other day about, like, veganism. It wasn't really like what the video was about, but I mean, every time you like take a bite out of a burger or a steak, I mean, in a lot of ways, you're kind of you are actively choosing to ignore the fact that like this was a living creature and people killed it, and you essentially killed it by choosing to buy it. You may as well have actually killed it yourself. You may as well have went to the factory where the cow was and killed it. You might as well have cut its fucking head off or whatever. I mean, it's in a little pen. A lot of these animals, they say free range or whatever, and they have a big field, and they live in a fucking cow mansion or a 5-star chicken hotel, and they can sit at the bar and like fuck hot chicken bitches and shit, and that's their fucking life. But like a lot of it's like a cage, you know, this big, and they can barely fucking move, and they're standing in their own shit. And then someone kills it, and then so you can enjoy your one meal. You know what I mean? That whole life of that chicken was basically mediocrity, so you can eat it. And like, yeah, in a lot of ways, I myself, I'm not a vegan, I'm not a vegetarian, but like people ignore that because it's pretty much impossible to live. I mean, that's the fact. It's pretty much impossible to live and feel like you're a really good person if you actually live an examined life. You know, and that's you know, there's doing, and then there's being the observer. And I think human beings especially, not that it makes us superior to where we should be able to dominate every other living thing that does in fact feel, and they could feel, and this I've heard this from other philosophers, so, you know, they could feel more than us. I mean, we don't really know. It's not like we have actually a good way to study that. I mean, if you step on like a deer's foot, like maybe that hurts more than if someone steps on your foot. You don't really know. But I definitely think human beings do have the special capacity to not kind of just do, even though we always are in kind of like a literal sense, we always are just sort of like doing. We're observing out of ourselves, watching ourselves do. But in conversation, we do have language, you know, it's unlike any other animal. And I think language kind of separates us, where it allows us to kind of like be a part of the moment and observe the moment simultaneously. And there's the observation aspect, and there's the, you know, thinking back, there's the thinking forward, and people do that. I would be 99% sure people do that more than animals. People look back in time, people look forward in time, and they can analyze, you know, they can analyze the past, they can try to prepare for the future or what have you. So I do think there is a certain type of satisfaction, and the opposite side of that coin, which I actually think is more relevant. There's a certain type of pain, like when I say like you throw a stone up and it suspends in the air until something happens, until karma happens, right? I mean, somebody disrespects you in the past, and I mean, you're waiting for the karma of somebody hitting them in the knee with a baseball bat, right? And karma's not real. So that stone, it's just like attention. It's a spring, or it's a stone that never fell back down to the planet, right? And that's just your life now. You just have a stone suspended, and you feel it every second, as long as you can remember it, right? As long as you don't go senile, it's kind of part of the tension states that you hold on to. So people do have this very distinct way to like reverberate their pain over and over, like waves in a pond, in a sense, where I don't think animals necessarily get that type of pain. Although, you know, you could look it up online. You see animals like crying over like a dead animal, and like, you know, apparently they can get depressed or whatever. I don't think that's untrue, but I think it's just more common in people to kind of have that lingering wave like pain. But you know, I don't think it makes any other pain irrelevant. And that's the thing. I mean, you just kind of consciously choose to ignore what your decisions really are, how it actually affects the universe. So it's kind of like, unless you are in full acceptance of, you know, like, okay, yeah, I'm gonna like eat the steak or whatever that is, and I'm not necessarily just talking about like diets at this point, but there's a lot of people who just kind of ignore like what their actions do to other people around them, and it's like, I feel like it's very important for people to feel like they're living a successful life, because if you had to account for every little thing, you'd be absolutely paralyzed. And there are people who become paralyzed, and that's just, you know, the thing with having kids. What if you had a kid that just became absolutely paralyzed by life? I mean, there's people chasing the stupidest things. They're chasing the stupidest ideas of themselves, like, I'm gonna like get this car and this house, and I'm gonna have the family and the white picket fence, and I'm gonna retire, and then I'm gonna start painting, and like they have this whole like life mapped out because they feel like it's what they're supposed to do. And then there's other people thinking like, oh man, if I walk here, will I step on a bug, you know? And like they're more concerned with like the present than their notion of the future. And the people with their notion of the future, and then a lot of people, everyone thinks about the future, right? I mean, they get lost in like what they would like to see themselves as in the future, you know? I mean, they get totally lost. And yeah, this video is about people getting lost. A lot of people I know. I'd like to think I don't get lost. You know, I was doing this when I was whatever. I was doing this when I was like 14. I was like pacing around a garage, like, let's say 15. I was pacing around a garage, like when I was, you know, smoking cigarettes, like talking bullshit philosophy. And even the philosophy became more refined. So the only things I really talk about at this point are like determinism and like egocentrism and, you know, my weird like sex-based, almost like Freudian, like sex-based view on life, how everything's kind of like sex-driven. And yeah, it's pretty, when you actually dissect it, it's kind of shitty. That's the thing. I used to talk about the social bubbles, and used to talk about love and like da-da-da-da, and it's all kind of fun, right? But there's like fundamental understandings that people, I think a lot of people arrive at, and a lot of the different fluff, like poetry type philosophy. And a lot of the poetry comes from, you know, like even the Alan Watts, like really fun to listen to, right? And I'm not saying there's no substance to it. There obviously is substance to it. But a lot of it is just mirroring these like few core concepts. It all kind of just relates to like, it's a deterministic universe, and people see themselves everywhere they go, and it's all, people might as well, their face might as well just be a fucking mask that's just a mirror, so you can see yourself in them and reverberate yourself and your own vibrations back to yourself through them. And yeah, I don't know, dude.